Okay friends, one of the first things we have to do to get started on the job is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheels are off the ground. After that, remove all of your lug nuts and then the wheel. The next thing that we're going to do is push back our caliper pistons. Just make sure we've got them both. Okay, take a peek in there, double check to make sure they're all the way pushed in. Okay, so now that we have this caliper pushed back and we know that it's in good condition, we're going to continue on to removing our caliper slider bolts here. There's 2 of them. Get that one nice and loose. Do the same to the other one. Now we're going to remove the caliper. Once you have it off, inspect it. If it looks like it's wet, it's more than likely brake fluid, and of course that's not good. This one looks good, so I'll go ahead and set it aside. When you do that, you want to make sure that you're doing it and putting no pressure on your flex hose. Remove your brake pads. We'll set those aside for recycling. Next, we're going to remove the caliper bracket bolts. There's one right here and one right there. Remove the bracket. Remove your rotor. Now we're going to clean up the mating surface that's on the wheel bearing here. That's the area that the rotor is going to sit right up against. Once you have the hub surface cleaned up, continue on by adding some copper never sees. Now it's going to be time to install the rotor. If it looks like it has an oily coating on it, make sure you clean it off. Okay, now over at the bench, the next thing that we want to do is start stripping down the caliper bracket here. What I mean by that is we want to take everything off of it. So you've got these metal tins. Go ahead and pry those right off. Set them aside. After you do that, we're going to start removing the caliper slider pins. To do that, you just kind of give it a twist. You're going to notice that the boot comes right off with it. After that, you can twist off the boot from the slider and remove it. Do the same to the other side. The next thing that we're going to want to do is clean up our slider pins here. You can tell that they have a lot of lubricant on them. So we'll just go ahead and clean that right off of there and then inspect the pin. If it looks like it's rotted or has a whole bunch of pitting, obviously that's going to cause a restriction when it comes time to movement in here. If that was the case, you'd want to probably replace that. This one looks really good, so I'm just going to wipe it down. When you're wiping it down, you want to pay attention to this area right up along here. There's a little bit of a groove. That's going to be very important because that's where the boot's going to ride. If you have a whole bunch of crunchies inside there or any type of debris, it's going to allow moisture to make its way inside and you're going to have a major issue. Okay, that looks good. Now let's go ahead and focus on the boot. For that, you want to make sure that you don't use any parts cleaner because you definitely don't want this boot to get damaged or swollen in any way. I'm just going to go ahead and take a rag. I'll roll it up and slide it right on through. Once it's through, just like this, you can just take the boot and then rub it along the inside of the rag there. Okay, as you can tell, that got off a lot of the grease. Now you want to inspect it. Make sure that it's not torn or worn in any way. If it's very stiff or brittle, you need to replace it. This one feels great. Now at this point, we're going to do the same to the other side, the slider and of course the boot. Okay, so I have both the pins done, I have both the boots done. Now the next thing we need to do is go ahead and clean up the areas on the bracket where those tins were going to ride. So essentially you can use a screwdriver, just kind of chisel it off of there if you wanted to. A little brush, it'll take a while that way. Or of course you can use one of these little grinders. Okay, so we have all 4 of those areas cleaned up. The next thing that I always like to pay attention to is this area along here. If it seems like anything's flaking up, just go ahead and peel that right off of there, because the more it peels up, the more chances you're going to have that it's going to cause issues with your brakes, such as touching up against the rotor. Now that we cleaned all 4 corners, the next thing we're going to want to do is clean up the slider ports. So I'm just going to use a little bit of brake cleaner. And then a nice bore brush. Come right inside the center here. Let that do its job. Go ahead and empty it out. Give it a little rinse. Okay. Now you're going to want to use a wire brush and just go along the edges right along here. That's going to be the area where the boot rides, just like on those slider pins. So you want to make sure that it's nice and clean. Now once you have that clean and the inside clean, do the same to the other side. Now the next thing we want to do is apply a thin amount of caliper grease along each of the 4 corners that we cleaned up where that caliper tin's going to go. Now once you have those 4 corners lubricated, it's going to be time for the tins. You want to pay attention to the tins, of course. You've got this little hooky-doo that comes through the center. That's going to fit in right where the rotor is supposed to go. It kind of really locks it in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to carefully line this up. Should fit right on. And then I'm going to go ahead and reach in, squeeze that tab right up and in against the bracket. That's going to ensure that this can't move. Make sure it's all the way on there, and then do the same to the other side. Now the next thing we're going to do is start lubricating our slider pins. You want to, of course, coat the entire shaft of the slider pin, and you want to make sure that you get all the way up and into that ridge right up along the top that I told you to make sure you clean out. Cover that whole entire thing. And I'm just going to take some of that caliper grease. I want to come right along the ridge right here on the bracket as well. Now it's going to be time to put on the caliper slider boot. Just pay attention because it has 2 different sides. You have one side with the wide end and one side with the thinner end. We're just going to carefully slide this right over so the thinner end is coming up onto the slider pin itself. Give it a nice click and then spin it right on there. Just going to apply a little bit more caliper grease to this. Now we can slide it right in here. Listen for it to click on and give it a nice spin. That's going to help make sure that the grease is worked all the way in, and of course make sure that moisture doesn't make its way in there. Do the same to the other side. Now it's going to be time to get the bracket on here. Go ahead and slide it over the rotor. We'll start in both of our bolts. I like to use a little bit of red thread locker. Once we have them both started and snugged, we'll torque them to 85 foot-pounds. Now it's going to be time to install the brake pads. We're just going to take it, slide one of the ears in right here, and then the other one in up along the top. Once they're in, slide them in. There we are. You want to make sure that they can move around. If for some reason the pad can't move around or you had to use a hammer to put it in, that means you didn't clean your bracket enough. There we are. Make sure it moves. Let's grab that caliper, put it down like this. Now we just want to apply a thin amount of caliper grease along each of these pistons. And then each of these 3 ears. Basically all the mating points that touch up against the pads. That's going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. After that, take your caliper and slide it right over the pads. You just want to make sure that the flex hose isn't twisted. So if I was to take this and do something like this, well, you can tell that that's going to cause a restriction. Put in both of your caliper slider bolts. Now we'll snug them up and torque them to 27 foot-pounds. Okay, now it's going to be time to get the wheel back on here, but before you do that, just take a quick check and make sure that you resecured everything along the way. Assuming it looks good, let's get the wheel back up on. Now I'm going to start all the lug nuts on there, we'll snug them up, get the wheel back on the ground, and then we'll torque the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. Now with the tire on the ground so the wheel can't spin on us, we're going to torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friends, we got the truck all back together. What's left to do now? Of course you're going to do the other side brakes. The process is going to be the exact same. Other than that, make sure you pump up your brake pedal and then take it for a road test.